My name is Mukunda Goswami. I'm 76. And this is this film that we're going to see. It's only about 20 minutes long. It's kind of a promotional thing. And the person who made it is a very good filmmaker. But she did this to show to the kind of elders of the movement so that she could get established. So it's a little bit promotional. I think you'll detect all that when you see it. But it's not. It's fairly well made. It's very well made, I think. I mean, it was probably the hardest thing she ever did. It's really hard to make a film. I mean, to make a good film. Yeah, so what we do is most of the people who live here get up early, and then the first service is about 4:30 in the morning. And yeah, that's what we do. And that lasts for about half hour, and then there's individual chanting on beads for a couple of hours, and then there's another ceremony, and then a breakfast, and a class, and it goes on and on like that. And then during the day, we do a lot of different things, depending on what's needed to be done. There's a few restaurants in the area that need to be stocked with different things, and then we have tours of this kind of place that we take people on. This is kind of like, you might say, it's kind of like a seminary or a retreat. It's kind of where in Christian parlance, it's like where the priests live, sort of. I mean, if that's kind of the way I could say it. But most of the devotees don't live here. They just live around in the area, and then there's quite a few in Melbourne and Sydney and Perth and different places, and Gold Coast, that you wouldn't tell by the way they look. They don't dress like I do, or they don't shave their heads or wear devotional clothes. So in a sense, there's a very kind of a real strong mainstream element. So this is kind of like the core of where we're learning how to delve very deeply into the scriptures of Krishna consciousness and what they say and all that sort of thing. So I guess we're ready to start the film. Is it? Yeah, it's a little bit long. I mean, 20 minutes isn't very long, but anyway. That's New York.
Here we are, 26 Second Avenue. Very few New Yorkers know the historical significance of this humble storefront. See the sign behind it? It says matchless gift.
Do you have an email address?
Yeah, I just sent it.
Okay.
A name
Okay.
that turned out to be quite prophetic indeed. So, Bhaktivedanta Swami decided to incorporate his fledgling movement. And that happened in July 1966. He founded the movement as ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness.
Well, that's pretty much what I was going to say. But and so if you have any questions, feel free to ask. There was a survey done about 100 years ago to ask people what their greatest fears was. And most people said it was fear of dying. Then a little later, another survey was done, and they said the fear of public speaking, asking questions in a situation like this is sort of like public speaking, was even greater than the fear of death. But I think that today's greatest fear is losing one's cell phone. That's my personal opinion. Anyway, if you have any comments or questions on any of this sort of stuff, please go ahead. I'll just wait a minute or so for you to think or get up enough gumption to ask. Yes?
May I make a comment, Maharaj?
Yeah.
I'd just like to let you know that Mukunda Goswami was one of the first disciples of Srila Prabhupada. He's the pioneer of this movement. In the the early days, you saw a picture of matchless gifts. And there wasn't so many. Srila Prabhupada had entered from India, not knowing anyone, with 10 rupees in his pocket. He stole the hearts of Mukunda Goswami and many other disciples, who then also went out around the world and began to spread this. Mukunda Goswami, was it London that you established the temples? Mukunda Goswami is actually responsible for the education of George Harrison and the Beatles and so many other beautiful devotees we have today. So if you have any questions about the early days of establishing ISKCON, Mukunda Maharaj is
Also, I wrote a book called Miracle on 2nd Avenue, which is about, it's not exactly a biography, it's more of a memoir of a 3-year period, starting in New York and then going to London and coming back to the United States. So if we're lucky, we'll get some copies of that a little later on, and I can distribute them to you. But anyway, if not, we'll do it another time. So any yes, this lady?
Can you tell us about your favorite memory of Prabhupada?
My what? Earliest memory?
Your favorite.
Oh, favorite. Well, it's hard to, I've never really isolated what the memories, what's the most favorite one. But the earliest one was when I first met him. It was in New York. It was in a very modest place, kind of about this, a little smaller than this, what they call the loft in the Bowery, which is the Skid Row of New York. That's where he started out. And so I was, and it was very dark in that place. There was just a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling without any fixture around it. And there were about 6 people sitting there, and they were kind of all what you'd call alternatives or hippie types. I wasn't exactly one of them. I bought into that philosophy, but I didn't have long hair, and I didn't look like a typical hippie. But anyway, I just thought he was a very special person, and he was kind of lecturing. He had big horn-rimmed glasses on, and he was probably the oldest. He was definitely the oldest person there. And I just felt I had to say something, because after I sat through, I didn't understand most of what he was saying, because he had a very thick accent, kind of Bengali Indian. But I had an interest in Indian stuff. I was a bit of a seeker, you might say. So I had a tambura. I didn't bring it that day. I didn't know what I was getting into. I just was written. It was scrawled on a piece of paper, an address and a time. That's all I knew. But I went up to him, and I thought he was going to be very distant. And it was very easy to talk to. And the first things I said was that I had a tambura, and he said, "Then bring it." And that was so. I couldn't think of anything else to say. He was just so approachable and so easy. He didn't disappear like a lot of speakers would have, into their limousines or whatever. And that was the end of it. And then I started to come regularly to that place. So that's the earliest memory I have. Any other comments or questions? This is a bit of this film was a bit of a promo, but at the same time it's very educational. It sort of like tells you what's going on a little bit. Anything else?
Yeah, I do have somebody.
Go ahead.
Well, if somebody has been spending some time in the movement and getting a feel for it and has made a decision that they would like to move forward and go into initiation, how does that process happen?
Well, like this, the film was kind of saying, there's a very deep philosophy, and it's in a way it's very superficial, because people, they just come because they like the vibes, or they like the food, or they like hospitality initially, and then as they get deeper into it, they find out there's actually a philosophy behind it, and it's very deep, and they encounter various types of obstacles. So it sounds like it's a lot of fun and very easy, but I've been doing it for about 50 years now, so I know, and I run into quite a number of obstacles. I'm still encountering them, and but how does it work? It just works by hanging out with the devotees a lot and talking to them and seeing what they do and how it works and what the steps are if one wants to go deeper into it. That's why there's sort of a I guess you call it a halfway house. Krishna, what's it called? Krishna house? Krishna pad here. Because to go into it, totally and all of a sudden, it's kind of a shock. That's the way it was in the early days. People shaved their heads all of a sudden, and they were very courageous because it was very much against the grain in the United States to look that different. And people, they make fun of people that look different. I mean, that's just the culture of the USA. They're kind of very. I mean, I can say from one who is in that variety of human beings and from that place that people are a little intolerant. I mean, in the big cities, in the countries, they're a lot nicer. I mean, I don't want to be too critical of the United States. It's got a lot of advantages. I mean, I think that one of the things that made it possible for Krishna consciousness to kind of get a jump start there was that there was a lot of sort of freedom of expression and technology available that wasn't so readily available in other parts of the world. Yes?
How did excuse me, the move into London? So you were the disciple that opened up or brought his come to London. How did that? Yes, he instructed to go, but how did you find the reception in London compared to America?
Well, I found that the British persona was a lot more. It was like going into a communist country for an American. It was like very rigid, and the laws and this conservative nature of the people. So it was difficult at first. Most of the people that we encountered were from India, so they kind of liked it. They thought, well, this is our religion and this and that. But then when we encountered the British people, if we chanted on the street, we found that they liked it. They were very receptive. But when it came to just about anything else, they were a lot more, kind of reserved. I felt. I mean, when we first went in there, we had to pass through the immigration. And they asked questions like, why did you come here? And what are you going to do? And how long are you going to stay? And every time we wanted to stay a little longer, we had to go through a long process with the immigration officials. And it required a bit of ingenuity to stay there. Wasn't the easiest thing. I mean, if it was more than 6 months or 3 months, it was kind of an ordeal. But anyway, that's England. At least they had a good political relationship with the U.S. So they didn't hate us. They just thought we were strange. Yes?
Mukunda Maharaj, so many disciples of Srila Prabhupada were empowered by him and had completely dedicated their lives to this movement. Nowadays, I see it, quite difficult for people to stick around and completely commit themselves to this process. And some of these disciples didn't have so much time with Srila Prabhupada. What was it about Srila Prabhupada that really captured people and encouraged people to dedicate their entire lives to this movement?
Well, I think that everybody is looking for a personality or a role model or a mentor or something like that, someone they can put their faith in. And it's very difficult to find those kinds of people. I mean, it can be our parents or our siblings or spouses or friends, whatever. But I think in the case of Prabhupada, that people saw that he was an elderly person from India and that he didn't have any personal motives and he wasn't after money and he was living in a very modest situation. And I think that's one of the reasons that people were able to surrender. And another thing is that in the United States, people are a little more revolutionary oriented or orientated. Is that the word they use in England, in this country? And so they were just kind of willing to try anything. Anything went. Whereas I haven't been back to the United States for a long time, for any length of time. It's been more than 10 or 15 or 20 years. So I don't know what the mood there is now, but I think it is a lot different because most of the people that when the movement started were, kind of searchers or hippies or whatever you call them, like looking for something different. Whereas now it's much different. But at the same time, people like chanting, and they like the vibrations, they like the food, they like the hospitality, and everybody likes that. Even the people of the U.S. who are a little bit kind of jaded, you might say. So that's what goes on up there. And I guess we're not going to get any books, but there's a bookstore if any of you are interested in philosophy that has a lot of, what this is all about.
Maybe we can get some in the shop here.
I think there's some in the shop. Miracle on. There's some in the. There's a shed down at the far end that has a box, and in that box.
Shop here, but there's a there.
Yeah, there's a shop. Yes.
What do you think it was that you were seeking that got you onto this path? Was it that role model figure, or?
Well, in a way, the founder of the movement was kind of a father figure, and I had a kind of a distant relationship with my own father, biological father, so that was there. Also, the priests and rabbis that I met, I kind of thought that they were either panty waists or I don't know, there was something hypocritical about them that I didn't like. And then I kind of sensed that he was a holy man who didn't have these kind of weaknesses, typical weaknesses of other holy men. So I thought that, let's give it a go, give it a try. And then I started reading his books. Probably on first or second meeting, I got some of the books that he had brought with him from India. And I thought, this is really, really good reading. I mean, it's I had been reading about Buddhism and other things, and I thought this was very much fulfilling the need. And he talked about the people of the present age in a way that was kind of gentle. He wasn't saying that this is polluted and full of polluted air and polluted water and polluted ground and all that stuff. He just said that the people in this age are, above all, unfortunate. He used that word, unfortunate. I thought, well, that was kind of nice. That was kind of a gentle way to say all the things that I thought were wrong with society. It wasn't like they were bad people, but they just had. It was just the symptom of the age. That the age we live in caused people to have an unfortunate situation, an unfortunate experience. Well, these are some of the books. Miracle on 2nd Avenue. Hare Krishna arrives in New York, San Francisco, and London, 1966 to 1969. This is more or less about that period. This is what happened. So if you want these, just come up and see me afterwards, if anyone is interested in them. Yes?
I have some more questions. Just about aesthetic. What does the pink represent?
Oh, well, it's a kind of like this saffron color is, I think Buddhists wear this color too. It's kind of, or sometimes they wear red, and it's supposed to be saffron, although I'm not too particular about what colors I wear. But it's supposed to have a subtle spiritual significance, a renunciation. It's supposed to mean a renounced life.
I think a question was about Tila.
Oh, that is wow, and the hair, like everything.
Oh, well, all that is kind of it's kind of uniform. Like, I think monks in all religious traditions shave their heads. And the reason they do that is that I mean, I'm not being critical of people that have hair, but hair is a source of vanity. I mean, I've heard that people can sit in front of a mirror for a long time, maybe 1 or more 2 hours, and just so their hair will look messed up, fashionably so. But hair is a big thing, and it's predicted in some of the scriptures that even the men will wear long hair, I mean, past the shoulder length, out of a need to be recognized for looking beautiful. So that's one thing. And then the mark on the forehead is just is a symbol of Hare Krishnas. Just like it's sort of like a uniform. Like it's worn for the reason that people will recognize who we are. Just like police or military people dress a certain way or they wear certain clothes so that people will know who they are and what they are and what they do. That's it. And if you ever want to venture up there, up the hill, you can see it in action. I mean, there's a tour that a guy conducts for anyone who wants to. And he told me that the place that they like more than everything else, including the Krishna village, not to be critical, is the temple. The temple because it's clean and it's different. It's just completely different. And that's what most people like to spend time doing or talking about or being there because they like the vibrations or whatever. They like the cleanliness. Yes?
How long into the beginning of the movement was it that you went over to India and experienced what the religion was like?
Oh, I probably didn't go to India for at least a couple of years, but I was kind of an adventurous person, but not terribly adventurous. I thought, well, England might be good because at least they speak the same language. So I went there, and then it was a couple of years later. It was my first trip actually, it was almost 3 years later when I first went to India, and I thought India was the most different place I'd ever been to. It smelled different. The air was different. The whole atmosphere was different. The people were different. Yeah, it was about 3 years.
Were they rather accepting of?
Well, in India, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's kind of like it's part of their religion to have a shaved head and to wear these kind of clothes. And the first reaction was that we're not the real thing. It's just like there was another group, and they identified us with that group, and they had a reputation for just being wild and crazy and having all kinds of drunken parties and all that sort of thing. So they identified it at first with that, and then there was another level of people that were highly placed. They were in the parliament. They even raised the question that they thought that it was a front for the CIA, that they were disguising themselves as, and actually one devotee was approached by a member of the CIA to be one of them, although he refused. But and it actually was said to happen, and it was a battle, even to build a temple. And the people of India thought that this whole thing was just. I mean, there were a lot of. It was a real uphill battle. They thought that the movement had gained ground because there was a lot of money in America, et cetera, et cetera. And for white people to be involved in anything this way is just hypocritical. So it was an uphill battle. But after about 10 years, they kind of softened a little bit. They kind of said that, well, we're not going anywhere, and maybe some of them are the real thing. But in their private reveries, there's still people, in especially politicians, who think that we're not the genuine article, that there's something about it that they just don't like the idea that something can take hold in the United States full of white people, and there's a heavy sort of anti-white. It's kind of a racial thing, but anyway, it does exist. And philosophically, there's a conflict too, because most of the people in that part of the world, and in all parts of the world, if there's any religion, they think that God can't have a personality, that the highest, and a lot of people still think this, that the highest level or realization of God is that God is a force or an energy. He's an impersonal. It's he or she. It's not that there's a person involved. So that's another thing that's really against the grain everywhere, not only in India but everywhere. So this I'm getting into like a little bit deeper of the theology of Krishna consciousness, but that's kind of what it's all about. That's one of the major obstacles that people encounter. There's parts of the world you can go to where people just think that it's madness. to think that God is a person. And even in India, they still think that to think that way is sentimental. And people that chant and dance in the streets are just, having a good time, nothing else. Yes, this lady had a comment.
Yeah, so segueing from that, I was curious about, because it is an obstacle, this idea of Supreme God kind of having persona or personality. Really, I think it's personally challenging. But would you say in your own personal experience of practice that the stacked science as you've progressed along perhaps maybe allowed you to have even more faith in this concept? Was it something that was always there for you?
Well,
Initial curiosity, or did you always have this faith?
Well, yeah, faith is very important, but I also think that philosophy is very important. And I thought that the opposition that I was encountering was due to a weakness in the philosophy. So I like to have philosophical discussions with people to try to convince them, and I was usually fairly successful that we're not the bodies, because that's a basic tenet of Krishna consciousness, that we're not the physical body. That there's another dimension to life, that we survive the death experience, and something like I think surveys show that something like 23% of Americans are supposed to believe in that concept of transmigration of the soul, whether they do or not, or whether they understand it completely. And there's been a lot of popular versions of that taking place in fictional books and in films. But that's been a pretty uphill thing. It's pretty much against the grain. Most people think that I just live once and I should get the most out of it because I'm going to die after a while. So philosophically, it's an uphill battle for that reason. I mean, you can't find any institution, any educational institution anywhere in the world that teaches the principle of transmigration of the soul. Even places like in Harvard or Oxford or any place, Sorbonne, they don't teach that. And most of the people who are professors and teachers think that that's just superstition or some kind of alternative, wild, impossible belief system, superstitious. Anyway, that's one of the big obstacles that one encounters. Yes?
From that even further, I noticed a lot of sustainability in terms of environment is incorporated into your daily life. Considering the principle of not just having this life and having what's to come, is that kind of intertwined in the sustainability of the earth?
I'm not 100% sure about what you're asking. Is the idea of the philosophy of Krishna consciousness at odds with environmental concerns? In a sense, well, there's a lot to Krishna consciousness that's not philosophical. It's behavioral, and that's more important in some ways to most people. For example, a lot of you have seen the cows that we're very friendly with them. So it's a principle of transmigration that every living being, whether it's movable or like an animal or a plant or a human or an insect or a fish or a bird, is conscious. That it has desires, it has a mechanism by which it thinks in its own way. So in a sense, the people who are Krishna consciousness are environmentalists by nature, because they don't believe it's good to harm the earth, to harm the air, to harm the water, to harm anything. So in a sense, and that's the one reason why devotees are vegetarian, because we don't like the animal slaughter. And of course we don't like the pollution that's put in dairy products either. But that's another thing. But the environment is a big concern. And about 25 years ago, the Krishna consciousness people wrote a book called Divine Nature. And it was a spiritual perspective on the environment. And about that time, there was a book called Beyond Beef, written by a guy named Jeremy Rifkin. And in that book, he says that the methane is increasing all the time. And I don't know if you know much about the biochemistry of feedlots, but the feedlots in the United States are the concentrated animal feed operations in the meat industry speak, exude a lot of methane. And methane, unlike other gases, doesn't break down. I mean, maybe it breaks down a little bit, but it creates a kind of like a cover. And it increases the pollution because the air is constantly being polluted, and this covering of methane. I mean, I think one of the big animal rights organizations is against, has even come out with sort of a slogan that the automobile is causing more pollution than all the factories put together. So there's something to that. But there's something to the fact that and now there's organizations that are making artificial meat because they want to abolish the feedlots because they're aware that these feedlots are a great pollutant to the environment. And I think it's just a matter of time because economically, I mean, I could be wrong, but economically, because you have all the fencing, the refrigeration, the salaries, the gasoline required to, and feed to run those concentrated animal feed operations, it's not very economic. Anyway, that's another dimension. So, any other comments or questions? So I think I'll stop here, and if anyone's interested in finding out about the earlier days, or there's some books here. Thank you very much for listening. Hare Krishna.